morning, good morning. Test, test. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Oh, hello. I am a smidge early to the stream today, but I think I will have to scarp it a bit later, so I wanted to try and make some progress with Dorian Gray, which we haven't been able to do in a little while. Good morning, everyone. How are you all faring? Does anyone remember what happened last time we read Dorian Gray? The Picture of Dorian Gray? By Oscar Wilde. Out of interest, we should be on chapter 14. So what is some kind of summary we can do of the book so far? Okay, so starting from the top, we have young Dorian Gray, who is exceedingly beautiful, as the author keeps reminding us. And we have his misogynistic friend, Lord Henry, aka Harry, and also his artist friend, Basil Hallward. And Basil Hallward draws this portrait of Dorian Gray, to which he wishes, oh, I wish I could be this beautiful forever. And somehow he ends up having a magical soul exchange where the portrait grows ugly in his stead. And as the years go by, Dorian Gray does some pretty awful stuff, including breaking the heart of a young theatre actress called Sybil Vane, and basically being the cause of her suicide. And also several years later, when he should be an adult, still looking very much the same, he meets with Basil Hallward, who is like, "Oh, Dorian, I've heard some awful stuff about you. Please tell me it's not true." To which Dorian Gray is like, "It's true. By the way, it's true." And then he leads Basil Hallward up to his like attic side room, like a room in his massive house, and he shows him his painting, to which Basil Hallward has the horror of seeing that the portrait that he drew of Dorian Gray once many years ago has now turned into this ghastly looking aged beast, for which Dorian Gray is internally but not manifesting. Good to see you too. Thank you for coming. And anyway, so upon this revelation, Dorian Gray puts a knife in his friend's neck, and Basil Hallward is now dead in his room, in that room in his attic upstairs. Which I think is about where we are in the story. I've missed some details along the way, but I think that is more or less the basic rundown of what has happened in the Picture of Dorian Gray so far. Sorry as ever for the crusty nature of my voice, but thank you for enduring, as always. You miss your homeboy Basil every day. Basil Howard. Like, even at the very end, he's trying to appeal to the good side of Dorian. And, as you can see from the result, Dorian Gray wasn't having a bar of it. The sadness of life. Welcome, Shu. Scoops up. Right. But yes. Shall we continue with chapter 14? So, Dorian Gray has just gone down to fetch the address of an associate called Alan Campbell. And he's like, yes, this is the man I want. What's our usual? Yeah, we'll stick with this one. Our usual Dorian Gray background music. The OG Basil, now extremely deceased. They continue on, chapter 14. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone see me? How is volume? Alrighty. At 9 o'clock the next morning, a servant came in with a cup of chocolate on a tray and opened the shutters. Dorian was sleeping quite peacefully, lying on his right side with one hand underneath his cheek. He looked like a boy who had been tired out with play or study. The man had to touch him twice on the shoulder before he woke, and as he opened his eyes, a faint smile passed across his lips, as though he had been lost in some delightful dream. Yet, he had not dreamed at all. His night had been untroubled by any images of pleasure or of pain. But youth smiles without any reason. It is one of its chiefest charms. He turned round, and leaning upon his elbow, began to sip his chocolate. The mellow November sun came streaming into the moon. The sky was bright, and there was a genial warmth in the air. It was almost like a morning in May. Gradually, the events of the preceding night crept with silent, blood-stained feet into his brain and reconstructed themselves there with terrible distinctness. He winced at the memory of all that he had suffered, and for the moment, the same curious feeling of loathing for Basil Hallward that had made him kill him as he sat in the chair came back to him. And he grew cold with passion. The dead man was still sitting there too, and in the sunlight now. How horrible that was. Such hideous things were for the darkness, not for the day. He felt that if he brooded on what he had gone through, he would sicken or grow mad. There were sins whose fascination were more in the memory than in the doing of them. Strange triumphs that gratified the pride more than the passions, and gave to the intellect a quickened sense of joy, greater than any joy they brought, or could ever bring, to the senses. But this was not one of them. It was a thing to be driven out of the mind to be drugged with poppies, to be strangled lest it might strangle oneself. When the half-hour struck, he passed his hand across his forehead, then got up hastily, dressed himself with even more than his usual care, giving a good deal of attention to the choice of his necktie and scarf pin, changing his rings more than once. Spent a long time also over breakfast, tasting his various dishes, talking to his valet about some new liveries that he was thinking about getting made for the servants at Selby, and going through his correspondence. At some of the letters he smiled. 3 of them bored him. One he read several times over, then tore up with a slight look of annoyance on his face. That awful thing, a woman's memory, as Lord Henry had once said. After he had drunk his cup of black coffee, he wiped his lips slowly, motioned to his servant to wait, and going over to the table, sat down and wrote 2 letters. One he put in his pocket. The other he handed to the valet. Take this round to 152 Hertford Street, Francis, and if Mr. Campbell is out of town, get his address. As soon as he was alone, he lit a cigarette and began sketching upon a piece of paper, drawing first flowers and bits of architecture, and then human faces. Suddenly, he remarked that every face that he drew seemed to have a fantastic likeness to Basil Hallward. He frowned, and getting up, went over to the bookcase and took out a volume at hazard. He was determined that he would not think about what had happened until it became absolutely necessary that he should do so. When he had stretched himself on the sofa, I'm going to pass through some of this passage if you don't mind. Skipping the reading. The whole of Venice was in those 2 lines. He remembered the autumn that he had passed there, and a wonderful love that had stirred him to mad, delightful follies. There was romance in every place. But Venice, like Oxford, had kept the background for romance, and to the true romantic, background was everything, or almost everything. Basil had been with him part of the time, and had gone wild over Tintred. Poor Basil. What a horrible way for a man to die. He sighed, took up the volume again, and tried to forget. He read of the swallows that fly in and out, of the little cafe at Smyrna, where the Hajis sit counting their amber beads, and the turbaned merchants smoke their long tasseled pipes and talk gravely to each other. He read of the obelisk and the Palace de la Concorde that weeps tears of granite, lonely sunless exile, longs to be back by the hot, lotus-covered Nile, where there are sphinxes and rose-red ibises, and white vultures with gilded claws, crocodiles with small beryl eyes that crawl over the green, steaming mud. He began to brood over those verses which, drawing music from kiss-stained marble, tell of that curious statue that Gautier compares to a contralto voice, couches in the porphyry room of the Louvre. But after a time that book fell from his hand. He grew nervous, and a horrible fit of terror came over him. What if Alan Campbell should be out of England? Days would elapse before he could come back. Perhaps he might refuse to come. What could he do then? Every moment was of vital importance. They had been great friends once, 5 years before. Almost inseparable, indeed. Then the intimacy had come to a sudden end. When they met in society now, it was only Dorian Gray who smiled. Alan Campbell never did. He was an extremely clever young man, though he had no real appreciation of the visible arts, and whatever little sense of the beauty of poetry he possessed, he gained entirely from Dorian. His dominant, intellectual passion was for science. At Cambridge, he had spent a great deal of his time working in the laboratory. He was still devoted to the study of chemistry, and had a laboratory of his own in which he used to shut himself up all day long, greatly to the annoyance of his mother, who had her heart set, standing for Parliament, and a vague idea that a chemist was a person who made up prescriptions. He was an excellent musician, however, as well, and played both the violin and the piano better than most amateurs. In fact, it was music that had brought him and Dorian Gray together. Music, and that indefinable attraction that Dorian seemed to be able to exercise whenever he wished, and indeed exercised often, without being conscious of it. They had met at Lady Berkshire's the night that Rubinstein played there, and after that used to be always seen together at the opera and wherever good music was going on. For 18 months, the intimacy lasted. Campbell was always either at Selby Royal or in Grosvenor Square. To him, as to many others, Dorian Gray was the type where everything was wonderful and fascinating in life. Whether or not a quarrel had taken place between them, no one ever knew, but suddenly people remarked that they scarcely spoke when they met, and that Campbell seemed to always go away early from any party at which Dorian Gray was present. He had changed, too, was strangely melancholy at times, appeared almost to dislike hearing music, and would never himself play, giving him as his excuse when he was called upon that he was so absorbed in science that he had no time left in which to practice. And this was certainly true. Every day he seemed to become more interested in biology. His name appeared once or twice in some of the scientific reviews in connection with certain curious experiments. This was the man Dorian Gray was waiting for. Every second, he kept glancing at the clock. As the minutes went by, he became horribly agitated. At last, he got up and began to pace up and down the room, looking a beautiful caged thing. He took long, stealthy strides. His hands were curiously cold. The suspense became unbearable. Time seemed to him to be crawling with feet of lead, while he, by monstrous winds, was being swept towards the jagged edge of some black cleft precipice. He knew what was waiting for him there, saw it indeed, and shuddering, crushed with dank hands his burning lids, as though he would have rubbed the very brain of its sight, driven the eyeballs back into their cave. It was useless. The brain had its own food on which it battened, and the imagination, made grotesque by terror, twisted, distorted, as by a living thing, pain, danced like some foul puppet on a stand, and grinned removing masks. Then suddenly, time stopped for him. Yes, that blind, slow-breathing thing crawled no more, and horrible thoughts, time being dead, raced nimbly on in front, and dragged a hideous future from its grave, and showed it to him. He stared at it. Its very horror made him stone. At last, the door opened, and his servant entered. He turned glazed eyes upon him.
"Mr. Campbell, sir?"
said the man. A sigh of relief broke from his parched lips, and the colour came back to his cheeks.
"Ask him to come in at once, Francis."
He felt that he was himself again. His mood of cowardice had passed away. The man bowed and retired. In a few moments, Alan Campbell walked in, looking very stern and rather pale, his pallor being intensified by his coal-black hair and dark eyebrows.
"Alan, this is kind of you. I thank you for coming. I had intended never to enter your house again, Gray, but you said it was a matter of life and death."
His voice was cold and hard. He spoke with slow deliberation. There was a look of contempt in the steady, searching gaze that he turned on Dorian. He kept his hands in the pockets of his astrakhan coat and seemed not to have noticed the gesture to which he had been greeted.
"Yes, it is a matter of life and death, Alan, and to more than one person. Sit down."
Campbell took a chair by the table, and Dorian sat opposite to him. The two men's eyes met. In Dorian's, there was infinite pity. He knew that what he was going to do was dreadful. After a strained moment of silence, he leaned across and said, very quietly, watching the effect for each word the face of him had sent for.
"Alan, in a locked room at the top of this house, a room to which nobody but myself has access, a dead man is seated at a table. He has been dead 10 hours now. Don't stir. Don't look at me like that. Who the man is, why he died, how he died, are matters that do not concern you. What you have to do is this." "Stop, Gray. I don't want to know anything further. Whether what you have told me is true or not true doesn't concern me. I entirely decline to be mixed up in your life. Keep your horrible secrets to yourself. They don't interest me anymore." "Alan, they will have to interest you. This one will have to interest you. I'm awfully sorry for you, Alan, but I can't help myself. You are the one man who is able to save me. I'm forced to bring you into the matter. I have no option. Alan, you're scientific. You know about chemistry and things of that kind. You've made experiments. What you have got to do is to destroy the thing that is upstairs. To destroy it so that not a vestige of it will be left. Nobody saw this person come into the house. Indeed, at the present moment, he is supposed to be in Paris. He will not be missed for months. When he is missed, there must be no trace of him found here. You, Alan, you must change him and everything that belongs to him into a handful of ashes that I may scatter in the air." "You are mad, Dorian." "Ah, I was waiting for you to call me Dorian. You are mad, I tell you. Mad to imagine that I would raise a finger to help you. Mad to make this monstrous confession. I will have nothing to do with this matter, whatever it is. Do you think I'm going to peril my reputation for you? What is it to me what devil's work you are up to? It was suicide, Alan. I'm glad of that, but who drove him to it? You, I should fancy. Do you still refuse to do this for me? Of course I refuse. I'll have nothing to do with it. I don't care what shame comes upon you. You deserve it all. I should not be sorry to see you disgraced. Publicly disgraced. How dare you ask me, of all men in the world, to mix myself up in this horror? I should have thought you knew more about people's characters. Your friend, Lord Henry Wotton, can't have taught you much about psychology. Whatever else he has taught you. Nothing will induce me to stir a step to help you. You've come to the wrong man. Go to some of your friends. Don't come to me. Alan? Alan. It was murder. I killed him. You don't know what he'd made me suffer. Whatever my life is, he had more to do with the making or the marring of it than poor Harry has had. He may not have intended it, but the result is the same. Murder. Good God, Dorian. Is that what you've come to? I shall not inform upon you. It is not my business. Besides, without my stirring in the matter, you are certain to be arrested. Nobody ever commits crime without doing something stupid, but I will have nothing to do with it. You must have something to do with it. Wait a moment. Listen to me. Only listen, Alan. All I ask of you is to perform a certain scientific experiment. You go to hospitals and dead houses, and the horrors that you do there don't affect you. If in some hideous dissecting room or fetid laboratory you found this man lying on a leaden table with red gutters scooped out in it for the blood to flow through, you would simply look upon him as an admirable subject. You would not turn a hair. You would not believe that you were doing anything wrong. On the contrary, you would probably feel that you are benefiting the human race, or increasing the sum of knowledge in the world, or gratifying intellectual curiosity, or something of that kind. What I want you to do is merely what you have done before, often. Indeed, destroy a body must be far less horrible than what you are accustomed to work at. And remember, it is the only piece of evidence against me. If it is discovered, I am lost. And it is sure to be discovered unless you help me. I have no desire to help you. You forget that I am simply indifferent to the whole thing. It has nothing to do with me. Alan, I entreat you. Think of the position I am in. Just before you came, I almost fainted with terror. You may know terror yourself someday. No, don't think of that. Look at the matter purely from the scientific point of view. You don't inquire where the dead things on which you experiment come from. Don't inquire now. I've told you too much as it is. But I beg of you to do this. We were friends once, Alan. Don't speak about those days, Dorian. They're dead. The dead linger sometimes. The man upstairs will not go away. He's sitting at the table with bowed head and outstretched arms. Alan, if you don't come to my assistance, I'm ruined. Why, they will hang me, Alan. Don't you understand? They will hang me for what I've done. There is no good in prolonging the scene. I absolutely refuse to do anything in the matter. It is insane of you to ask me. You refuse? Yes. Refuse. I entreat you, Alan. It is useless.
The same look of pity came into Dorian Gray's eyes. Then, he stretched out his hand, took a piece of paper, and wrote something on it. He read it over twice, folded it carefully, and pushed it across the table. Having done this, he got up and went over to the window. Campbell looked at him in surprise, then took up the paper and opened it. As he read it, his face became ghastly pale. He fell back in his chair. A horrible sense of sickness came over him. He felt as if his heart was beating itself to death in some empty hollow. Maybe this would be better. Trying to find something suitably ominous. After 2 or 3 minutes of terrible silence, Dorian turned round and came and stood behind him, putting his hand upon his shoulder.
I am so sorry for you, Alan,
he murmured.
But you leave me no alternative. I have a letter written already. Here it is. You see the address. If you don't help me, I must send it. If you don't help me, I will send it. You know what the result will be. But you're going to help me. It is impossible for you to refuse now. I tried to spare you. You will do me the justice to admit that. You were stern and harsh and offensive, and you treated me as no man has ever dared to treat me. No living man at any rate. I bore it all. Now, it is for me to dictate terms.
Campbell buried his face in his hands, and a shudder passed through him.
Yes, it's my turn to dictate terms, Alan. You know what they are. The thing is quite simple. Come, don't work yourself into this fever. Nothing has to be done. Face it. Do it.
A groan broke from Campbell's lips, and he shivered all over. The ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece seemed to him to be dividing time into separate atoms of agony, each of which was too terrible to be borne. He felt as if an iron ring was being slowly tightened round his forehead, as if the disgrace with which he was threatened had already come upon him. The hand upon his shoulder weighed like a hand of lead. It was intolerable. It seemed to crush him.
Come, Alan. You must decide at once. I cannot do it,
he said, as though words could alter things.
You must. You have no choice. Don't delay.
He hesitated a moment.
Is there a fire in the room upstairs? Yes. There is a gas fire with asbestos. I shall have to go home and get some things from the laboratory. No, Alan. You must not leave the house. write on a sheet of notepaper what you want. My servant will take a cab and bring things back for you.
Campbell scrawled a few lines, blotted them, and addressed an envelope to his assistant. Dorian took the note up and read it carefully. Then he rang the bell and gave it to his valet, with orders to return as soon as possible and bring the things with him. As the hall shut, Campbell started nervously, and having got up from the chair, went over to the chimney-piece. He was shivering with a kind of ague. For nearly 20 minutes, neither of the men spoke. A fly buzzed noisily about the room. The ticking of the clock was like the beat of a hammer. As the chime struck 1, Campbell turned round and, looking at Dorian Gray, saw that his eyes were filled with tears. There was something in the purity and refinement of that sad face that seemed to enrage him.
"You are infamous. Absolutely infamous," he muttered. "Hush, Alan. You have saved my life." "Your life? Good heavens, what a life that is. You have gone from corruption to corruption, and now you have culminated in crime. Doing what I am going to do, what you force me to do. It is not of your life that I am thinking."
"Ah, Alan," murmured Dorian with a sigh.
"I wish you had 1,000 part of the pity for me that I have for you."
He turned away as he spoke and stood looking out at the garden. Campbell made no answer. After about 10 minutes, a knock came to the door. A servant entered, carrying a large mahogany chest of chemicals, with a long coil of steel and platinum wire and 2 rather curiously shaped iron clamps.
"Shall I leave the things here, sir?"
asked Campbell.
"Yes,"
said Dorian.
"And I'm afraid, Francis, that I have another errand for you. What is the name of the man at Richmond who supplies Selby with orchards?"
"Harden, sir."
"Yes, Harden. You must go down to Richmond at once. See Harden personally and tell him to send twice as many as I ordered, to have as few white ones as possible. In fact, I don't want any white ones. It is a lovely day, Francis, and Richmond is a very pretty place. Otherwise I wouldn't bother you about it." No trouble, sir. At what time shall I be back?"
Dorian looked at Campbell.
"How long will your experiment take, Alan?"
he said, in a calm, indifferent voice. The presence of a third person in the room seemed to give him extraordinary courage. Campbell frowned and bit his lip.
"It will take about 5 hours,
he answered.
"It'll be time enough then. If you're back at 7:30, Francis. Or stay, just leave my things out for dressing. You can have the evening to yourself. I am not dining at home, so I should not need you." "Thank you, sir,"
said the man, leaving the room.
"Now, Alan, there's not a moment to be lost. Oh, how heavy this chest is. I'll take it for you. You bring the other things."
He spoke quickly and in an authoritative manner. Campbell felt dominated by him. They left the room together. When they reached the top landing, Dorian took out the key and turned it in the lock. Then he stopped, and a troubled look came into his eyes. He shuddered.
"I don't think I can go in, Alan,"
he murmured.
"It is nothing to me. I don't require you,"
said Campbell coldly. Dorian half opened the door. As he did so, He saw the face of his portrait leering in the sunlight. On the floor in front of it, the torn curtain was lying. He remembered that the night before he had forgotten, for the first time in his life, to hide the fatal canvas, and was about to rush forward when he drew back, a shudder. What was that loathsome red dew that gleamed wet and glistening on one of the hands, as though the canvas had sweated blood? How horrible it was! More horrible it seemed to him for the moment than the silent thing that he knew was stretched across the table, the thing whose grotesque, misshapen shadow on the spotted carpet showed him that it had not stirred but was still there, as he had left it. He heaved a deep breath, opened the door a little wider, and with half-closed eyes and averted head walked quickly in, determined that he would not look even once upon the dead man. Then stopping down, taking up the gold and purple hanging, flung it right over the picture. There he stopped, feeling afraid to turn around, and his eyes fixed themselves on the intricacies of the pattern before him. He heard Campbell bringing in the heavy chest, the irons, and the other things that he had required for his dreadful work. He began to wonder if he and Basil Hallward had ever met, and if so, what they had thought of each other.
"Leave me now,"
said a stern voice behind him. He turned and hurried out, just conscious that the dead man had been thrust back into the chair, that Campbell was gazing into a glistening yellow face. But as he was going downstairs, he heard the key being turned in the lock. It was long after 7 when Campbell came back into the library. He was pale, but absolutely calm.
"I have done what you asked me to do,"
He muttered.
"And now goodbye. Let us never see each other again." "You have saved me from ruin, Alan. I cannot forget that,"
said Dorian, simply. As soon as Campbell had left, he went upstairs. There was a horrible smell of nitric acid in the room. But the thing that had been sitting at the table was gone. And so we reached the end of chapter 14. Damn, the gaslighting is right. Damn, the gaslighting is so right. Dorian Gray, wowie. Talk himself out of murder. I would like to read this next chapter. It is slightly long in places, so I might skip some parts, but I'll do my best to just whiz through chapter 15 as well, because I think going on to chapter 16, it tells you something else quite curious about Dorian Gray, which will be a good session to set aside, methinks. So, chapter 15. For the most part, it's just a conversation between Dorian Gray and some others at a party. So, chapter 15. That evening at 8:30, exquisitely dressed and wearing a large buttonhole of Parma violets, Dorian Gray was ushered into Lady Narborough's drawing room by bowing servants. His forehead was throbbing with maddened nerves, and he felt wildly excited, but his manner as he bent over his hostess's hand was as easy as graceful as ever. Perhaps no one ever seemed so much as one's ease as when one has to play a part. Certainly no one looking at Dorian Gray that night could have believed that he had passed through a tragedy as horrible as any tragedy of our age. His finely shaped fingers could never have clutched a knife for sin, nor those smiling lips have cried out on God and goodness. He himself could not help wondering at the calm of his demeanour, and for a moment felt keenly the terrible pleasure of a double life. It was a small party, got up rather in a hurry by Lady Narborough, who was a very clever woman with what Lord Henry used to describe as the remains of a really remarkable ugliness. She had proved an excellent wife to one of our most tedious ambassadors, and having buried her husband properly in a marble mausoleum which she herself designed, and married off her daughters to some rich, rather elderly men, she was devoted now to the pleasures of French fiction, cookery, and esprit when she could get it. Dorian was one of her especial favourites, as she always told him that she was extremely glad she had not met him in early life. "I know, my dear, I should have fallen madly in love with you," she used to say, "and thrown my bullet right over the mills for your sake. It is most fortunate that you were not thought of at the time. As it was, our bonnets were so unbecoming, and the mills were so occupied in trying to raise the wind, that I had never even had a flirtation with anybody. However, that was all Narborough's fault. He was dreadfully short-sighted, and there's no pleasure in taking in a husband who never sees anything." Dorian murmured a graceful compliment and looked around the room. Yes, it was certainly a tedious party. Two of the people he had never seen before, and the others consisted of Ernest Harridan, one of those middle-aged mediocrities so common in London clubs who have no enemies but are thoroughly disliked by their friends. Lady Ruxton, an overdressed woman of 47 with a hooked nose, always trying to get herself compromised. Lady Alice Chapman, his hostess's daughter, a dowdy, dull sort of girl, with one of those characteristic British faces that, once seen, are never remembered, and her husband, a red-cheeked, white-whiskered creature who, like so many of his class, was under the impression that inordinate joviality was to atone for an entire lack of ideas. He was rather sorry that he had come, till Lady Narborough, looking at the great Ormola gilt clock, exclaimed, "How horrid of Lord Henry Wotton to be so late! I sent round to him this morning on chance, and he promised so faithfully not to disappoint me." It was some consolation that Harry was to be there, and when the door opened, and he heard a slow, musical voice lending charm to some insincere apology, he ceased to feel bored. But at dinner, he could not eat anything. Plate after plate went away untasted. He drank eagerly, for his thirst seemed to increase. "Dorian," said Lord Henry at last, "what is the matter with you tonight? You are quite out of sorts." Let's see. We'll skip along a smidge further. Lady Narborough hit him with her fan. "Lord Henry, I am not at all surprised that the word says that you are extremely wicked." "Who says that?" asked Lord Henry, elevating his eyebrows. "It can only be the next world. This world and I are on excellent terms." "Everybody I know says you are very wicked," cried the old lady, shaking her head. Lord Henry looked serious for some moments. "It is perfectly monstrous," he said at last. "The way people go about nowadays, saying things against each other, behind one's back, that are absolutely and entirely true." "Isn't he incorrigible?" cried Dorian, leaning forward in his chair. See, a little bit ahead again. "Now mind you don't stay too long over your politics and scandal," cried Lady Narborough from the door. "If you do, we are sure to squabble upstairs." A smile curved Lord Henry's lips, and he turned around and looked at Dorian. "Are you better, my dear fellow? You seemed rather out of sorts at dinner." I'm quite well, Harry. I'm tired, that's all.
You were charming last night. The little Duchess is quite devoted to you. She tells me you are going down to Selby.
She's promised to come on the 20th.
Is Monmouth to be there too?
Oh,
yes, Harry. He bores me dreadfully. It's almost as much as he bores her. She's very clever. Too clever for a woman. She lacks the indefinable charm of weakness. It is the feet of clay that make the gold of the image precious. Her feet are very pretty, but they are not feet of clay. White porcelain feet, if you like. They've been through the fire, and what fire does not destroy, it hardens. She's had experiences.
How long has she been married?
An eternity, she tells me, I believe. According to the peerage, it is 10 years. But 10 years with Monmouth must seem like an eternity, with time thrown in. Who else is coming?
Oh, the Willoughbys, Lord Rugby and his wife, our hostess, Geoffrey Coston, the usual set.
I've asked Lord Grochin. I like him. A great many people don't, but I find him charming. He atones for being occasionally somewhat overdressed by being always absolutely overeducated. He sees to be a very modern type. I don't know if he'll be able to come, Harry. He may have to go to Monte Carlo with his father. What a nuisance people's people are. Try and make him come. By the way, Dorian, you ran off very early last night. You left before 11. What did you do afterwards? Did you go straight home?
Dorian glanced at him hurriedly and frowned.
No, Harry. I did not get home till nearly 3. Did you go to the club?
Yes.
No, I don't mean that. I didn't go to the club. I walked about, and I forget what I did. How inquisitive you are, Harry. You always want to know what one has been doing. I always want to forget what I've been doing. I came in at 2:30 if you wish to know the exact time. I had left my latchkey at home, and my servant had to let me in. If you want any corroborative evidence on the subject, you can ask him.
Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders.
My dear fellow, as if I cared. Let us go up to the drawing room. No sherry, thank you, Mr. Chapman. Something has happened to you, Dorian. Tell me what it is. You are not yourself tonight.
Also, hello, Raiders. Welcome, Raiders. Sorry about the read. We are just scuttling through the rest of this chapter, and then I may have to tie this up. Let's go back to this for a moment. Since they were at the party, I forgot to change background music.
Don't mind me, Harry. I'm irritable and out of temper. I shall come round and see you tomorrow, or the next day. Make my excuses to Lady Narborough. I shan't go upstairs. I shall go home. I must go home. All right, Dorian. I dare say I shall see you tomorrow at tea time. The Duchess is coming. I shall try to be there, Harry,
he said, leaving the room. As he drove back to his own house, he was conscious that the sense of terror he had thought he'd strangled had come back to him. Lord Henry's casual questioning had made him lose his nerve for a moment, and he wanted his nerve still. Things that were dangerous had to be destroyed. He winced. He hated the idea of even touching them. Yet, it had to be done. He realized, and when he had locked the door of his library, He opened the secret press into which he had thrust Basil Hallward's coat and bag. A huge fire was blazing. He piled another log on it. The smell of the singeing clothes and burning leather was horrible. It took him 3/4 of an hour to consume everything. At the end, he felt faint and sick, and having lit some Algerian pastils in a pierced copper brazier, he bathed his hands and forehead with a cool musk-scented vinegar. Suddenly, he started. His eyes grew strangely bright, and he gnawed nervously at his underlip. That's not the right one. Back to this one. Between two of the windows stood a large Florentine cabinet, made out of ebony and inlaid with ivory and blue lapis. He watched it as though it were a thing that could fascinate and make afraid, as though it held something that he longed for, yet almost loathed. His breath quickened. A mad craving came over him. He lit a cigarette, and then threw it away. His eyelids drooped till the long fringed lashes almost touched his cheek. But he still watched the cabinet. At last, he got up from the sofa from which he had been lying, went over to it, and having unlocked it, touched some hidden spring. A triangular drawer passed slowly out. His fingers moved instinctively towards it, dipped in, closed on something. It was a small box of black and gold dust lacquer, elaborately wrought. The sides patterned with curved waves, the silken cords hung with round crystals, and tasseled and plaited metal threads. He opened it. Inside was a green paste, waxy in luster, the odor curiously heavy and persistent. He hesitated for some moments, with a strangely immobile smile upon his face. Then shivering, though the atmosphere of the room was terribly hot, he drew himself up and glanced at the clock. It was 20 minutes to 12. He put the box back, shutting the cabinet doors as he did so, and went into the bedroom. As midnight was striking bronze blows upon the dusky air, Dorian Gray, dressed commonly and with a muffler wrapped round his throat, tripped quietly out of his house. In Bond Street, he found a hansom with a good horse. He hailed it, and in a low voice, gave the driver an address. The man shook his head. It is too far for me, he muttered. Here is a sovereign for you, Dorian. You shall have another if you drive fast. All right, sir, answered the man. You'll be there in an hour. And after his fare had got in, he turned his horse round and drove rapidly towards the river. And so we reach the end of chapter 15. So once again, welcome raiders. Thanks for popping in. I did plan to have a pretty short stream today, so apologies if I tie up soon. But just to summon our 2 chapters for today. So Dorian Gray, having murdered his friend friend Basil Hallward, called his ex-friend, also ex-friend, Alan Campbell, a man of science in quotations. And upon begging him and then threatening him, he gets the corpse of Basil Hallward melted into nothing. And of course, Alan Campbell, who doesn't want anything to do with Dorian Gray, is like, I'm out. I'm out, bye. I never want to see you again. But, you know, having been threatened to do this, Dorian Gray gets his way, and the body is disposed of. And in chapter 15, he goes to a party, just an ordinary party, with ordinary folks, and says life is boring. The gist of what I didn't read was Dorian Gray says life is not worth living. And his friend Lord Henry, aka Harry, oh, thank you for the bun, drink, water, redeem, compose, sir. Have a sip. Harry inadvertently asks Dorian, so, what happened to you last night? Where did you go last night? And Dorian Gray, like, has a mental fit. He is like, I went home. No, I didn't. I went to the club. Wait, no, I didn't go to the club. Don't ask where I was. Anyway, this is exactly what I was doing at 2:30 last night. And, Lord Henry is like, well, I didn't ask, but whatever, thanks for telling me. Something is really wrong with you. And, Dorian Gray, who realizes that he's kind of losing his mind, says he's just gonna go home. Bye. I am going home. Don't worry about me. Please make an excuse for Lady Narborough. Heading out. Also, this probably wasn't very well highlighted because of the way I read, but they're going down to Selby. I think what's happening is Dorian Gray and some other rich folks are going down to Selby, and including the little Duchess, who I think has a crush on Dorian Gray. So Dorian Gray, the Duchess, Monmouth, the Willoughbys, some other folks are just going down, probably to like this country club area. I have no idea how to describe it in not in layman terms aside from the rich folks country club. They're probably just going to party and hunt and drink. Anyway, Dorian Gray goes home, and he thinks, I've gotta destroy Basil Hallward's stuff, so he spends a while at his fire, burning his clothes and his bag, and then after everything is done, he becomes nervous. And what he does, perhaps it's not very obvious to people who don't know what this is, but he goes to his cupboard, he presses a secret switch and pulls out a little box with opium in it. And then he puts it away, and then he goes away and gets changed into normal people clothes, wears a scarf, and then crawls out of his house. He sneaks out of his own house, and he has just gone to get a horse to some unknown address. Yes, it doesn't say specifically what it is. That will say in the next chapter what it is. That in the little box is none other than opium. The mention of poppies before, I think, also implies that he's had a hand in the drugs. Anyway, Dorian Gray, he's up to some shady stuff. And with that, now that we have summed up that awful book, turns on my usual background music again. What do you guys think? Aside from Canary, who said that Dorian Gray should hang, because you're right, Dorian Gray should hang. I won't deny, I also think that Dorian Gray should hang for, doing the murder. He said it himself. If he's caught for doing this, he will hang. as is the fate for someone who murders their pal. Oh, are you welcome? Thank you so much. Hope he goes down in a fit of madness too. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Be suitable for Dorian Gray, but if I can be honest, I feel like all throughout this book, it's been just peppered with bouts of Dorian Gray's madness, more or less. Like in chapter 15 as well, he like has this little fit, and he says, so he says, yes, he answered. Then he bit his lip. No, I don't mean that. I didn't go to the club. I walked about. I forget what I did. How inquisitive you are, Harry. You always want to know what one has been doing. I always want to forget what one has been doing. I came in at 2:30 if you want to know the exact time. I left my latchkey at home and my servant had to let me in. If you want any corroborative evidence on the subject, you can ask him. As if his friend cares about those things. But, Dorian Gray, having his bouts of madness. He's not a very good liar, admittedly. I don't know if he's a good liar or a terrible liar, perhaps a bit of both. This is obviously going a few chapters back. But, you know, he gets approached by Basil Hallward, who basically says, these past few years I've heard some real crap talk about you. And it's these people saying that you've done just a whole lot of awful things and become an awful person. Dorian, tell me it's not true. And Dorian Gray is like, so ultimate gaslighter Dorian Gray says, I'm always in the right and everyone else is in the wrong. And even if I did something that was bad, I was totally justified in doing them. Anyway, you call me a sinner? I'm not a sinner. And then he knifes Basil Hallward. So, interesting guy, Dorian Gray. It's fascinating. This character is truly fascinating. I hope. Yes, rip Basil. Truly rest in peace, Basil. Even at the very end, Basil is like, you know, there's a way to forgiveness if you like, you pray and you truly want to better yourself now. It's never too late, Dorian. It's never too late. And instead of thinking for a moment that Basil might be right and that there's a way to redeem him from all of his sin, Dorian Gray just decides to embrace the sin and kills his friend. Practically a perfect murder. So, there goes the bod. Anyway, enough chatter about that. Thank you for coming along to a little bit of story time with Bun. I realized that it wasn't very long today, and I'm sorry if you're just coming in. I'm about to head out. But as always, I think that Dorian Gray is a hilarious time, probably for the worst reason. But it's an interesting book as always. Thank you for listening to my crusty frog voice reading as always. I appreciate that despite the crust, there are folks who still enjoy it. I'm sure you'll see me soon anyway, and I'm sure we'll get to continuing on with Dorian Gray momentarily. Thank you for the stream. Thank you. Oh, Debbie. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the Thank you so much for the 5 gift subs. Oh my goodness. Debbie's at it again. Good night to you all. Wowie. What do I say aside from thank you? Please do thank Debbie if you received a sub. I Why? Why do you do it? Shakes my fist. But nonetheless, it's appreciated. Ah, mad lad. But yes, I will hop back into my coffin now, and I am sure we will continue our story times soon. Good night, everyone, and thank you for today. Take care. Ah, yeah. Good night.